One of the most harrowing events of the years before the Second World War was when the Japanese soldiers entered the Chinese city of Nanjing. The massacre and terrifying actions that came later were some of the most savage in recorded history, and the Japanese army were responsible for a huge amount of death and slaughter. There were thousands of people who were executed and were subjected to harrowing ordeals. The massacre began on the 13th of December 1937, on the very day that the Japanese entered the city, and they rampaged throughout doing whatever they wanted. At the end of World War II, there were a number of Japanese generals and members of government who were later executed themselves for the horror that took place within Nanjing. But one thing to consider is the ordeal of the women inside the city, and there were many who became victims of the Japanese rampaging forces. Welcome to The Untold Past. Today we look at the executions of the women of Nanjing, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The Japanese for many years before they attacked Nanjing were in deep conflict with the Chinese. Full-scale war did not break out between the two nations until the Marco Polo Bridge incident in July 1937, and the Japanese army attacked an entrance to Beijing. This began the Second Sino-Japanese War, and the conflict between the two preceded the Second World War. But the Japanese army engaged in a campaign of mass slaughter, and they marched from Shanghai, after military successes, the 190 miles down the Yangtze River, to Nanjing, another large city. On the march there were terrifying war crimes carried out. There were two Japanese officers who even had a competition to see who could slaughter 100 people the quickest using a sword. These two men subject many prisoners of war and civilians to executions using their swords, and they did not attack enemy combatants and soldiers, just killing civilians. Other soldiers continued the war crimes, and it was said of one division that we'd take all the men behind the houses and kill them with bayonets and knives, then we'd lock up the women and children in a single house and assault them at night. Then before we left the next morning, we'd kill all the women and children, and to top it off, we'd set fire to the houses, so that even if anyone came back, they would not have a place to live. Inside of Nanjing, there were many Western people living in the city, and as the Japanese army approached, most fled and escaped. The Japanese arrived outside the city gates on December 9th, 1937, and there was fierce fighting around the city, and it took 4 days for the defending garrison to crumble. Within the city there was chaos as artillery bombardment rained down on civilians, and on the 13th of December, the 6th and 116th Divisions of the Japanese Army were the first to enter the city. But what came next no one could have imagined. The Japanese, from the moment they entered Nanjing, undertook a horrific campaign of murder, execution, torture, large-scale assault, looting, arson, and more evil. The crimes continued to be carried out for roughly a period of 6 weeks, and the earlier weeks were the worst. It was said by one witness that the Japanese have looted widely yesterday and today, have destroyed schools, have killed citizens, and assaulted women. 1,000 disarmed Chinese soldiers, whom the International Committee hoped to save, were taken from them, and by this time are probably shot or bayoneted. In our South Hill house, Japanese broke the panel of the storeroom and took out some old fruit juice and a few other things. However, the attacks upon women were harrowing and were widespread. It was later estimated by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, which was set up to try Japanese war criminals at the end of the Second World War, that there were around 20,000 cases of assault against women inside of Nanjing. Many other estimates claim that the actual toll of the assaults upon women was 80,000, 4 times what the International Military Tribunal for the Far East claimed. There was no limit to the victims, and the Japanese soldiers committed horrific crimes against women and girls of any age, and there were accounts of these women being killed also after being subjected to their ordeals. One Japanese soldier claimed about the assault against the women of Nanjing that, and I quote, "Women suffered the most. No matter how young or old, they all could not escape the fate of being assaulted. We sent out coal trucks to the city streets and villages to seize a lot of women, and then each of them was allocated to 15 to 20 soldiers for relations or abuse. After assaulting, we would also kill them." Some of the women, after being subjected to their ordeals, were killed in truly terrifying and awful ways, and there were truly disgusting stories that came out about how women were killed. One woman who was pregnant was stabbed many times all over, and it was said that women were often bayoneted by drunken Japanese soldiers. One Reverend James M. McCallum, who remained inside of the city, claimed that, "I know not where to end. Never I have heard or read such brutality. We estimate at least 1,000 cases a night, and many by day. In case of resistance or anything that seems like disapproval, there is a bayonet stab or a bullet. People are hysterical. Women are being carried off every morning, afternoon and evening. The whole Japanese army seems to be free to go and come as it pleases, and to do whatever it pleases." Some of the most terrifying accounts as to what happened towards the civilians and people of Nanjing were recorded by a surgeon who worked inside of the university hospital. He documented in his letters what was happening, and he claimed that 100,000 people were killed by Japanese soldiers inside of the city. But his letters from when the Japanese soldiers entered Nanjing show how awful they were towards women. He stated, and I quote, "The slaughter of civilians is appalling. I could go on for pages telling of cases of assault and brutality almost beyond belief. 2 bayoneted corpses are the only survivors of 7 street cleaners who were sitting in their headquarters when Japanese soldiers came in without warning or reason and killed 5 of their number and wounded the 2 that found their way to the hospital. Let me recount some instances occurring in the last 2 days. Last night the house of one of the Chinese staff members of the university was broken into, and 2 of the women, his relatives, were assaulted. 2 girls about 16 were assaulted to death in one of the refugee camps. In the university middle school, where there are around 8,000 people, the Japanese came in 10 times last night, over the wall, stole food, clothing, and assaulted until they were satisfied. They bayoneted one little boy of 8, who had 5 bayonet wounds, including one that penetrated his stomach. A portion was outside his abdomen. I think he will live." The man who claimed to have been the leader of the safety zone, John Raab, also documented the atrocities, and for the 17th of December, his diary entry wrote, "2 Japanese soldiers have climbed over the garden wall and are about to break into our house. When I appear, they give the excuse that they saw 2 Chinese soldiers climb over the wall. When I show them my party badge, they return the same way. In one of the houses in this narrow street behind my garden wall, a woman was assaulted and then wounded in the neck with a bayonet. I managed to get an ambulance so we can take her to the Kulu hospital. Last night up to 1,000 women and girls are said to have been assaulted, about 100 girls at the Jinling College alone. You hear nothing but assault. If husbands or brothers intervene, they're shot. What you hear and see on all sides is the brutality and true evil of the Japanese soldiers." The attitudes of the Japanese soldiers towards the women of the city of Nanjing was disgusting and horrific, and they saw the women as spoils of war and trophies, and one former soldier claimed after committing terrible evils that, "We always stabbed and killed them because dead bodies don't talk." There were even more terrifying events in which Japanese soldiers forced women and also men at gunpoint to do certain things, but the women of Nanjing were part of the overall victims of the whole bloodshed and evil in the city conducted by the Japanese army. Witnesses claimed that the alleys and streets were filled with the dead, and that the conduct of the Japanese army as a whole in Nanjing was a blot on the reputation of their country. But they would go on to conduct further evils in the conflicts before and during the Second World War, but what happened inside of Nanjing has gone down as some of the most sadistic war crimes in the whole of human history. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.